right, guys, and welcome back to the next edition of Taking Chances with Shaun Coe. I've got a really special guest today, and we're kind of sticking with a similar theme here today. It's another gentleman that I've almost became enamored with through the power of LinkedIn networking, but I've yet to have a conversation with him. So I've got Clark Willcox coming in live, the owner of Digital Recruiter. He's got a new podcast coming out and just some great content in the recruitment space. So Clark, I'm happy to have you here, but how you doing today, my friend?
Shaun, thanks for having me. I'm doing great, fired up on some coffee. The weather's nice. We're getting some fall weather and always excited to talk recruitment and make a new friend. So I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to have it. I guess I should have started this off too, just to showcase that I actually have not done enough research. Where are you based out of, Clark?
Outside Columbus, Ohio.
Okay, Columbus, Ohio, market I used to have. So Ohio State fan, I'm assuming.
Well, I grew up in Boston, so I'm all pro sports, but, I won't root against them. So
say no more. You can't where you live. You can't where you live. I'm a Notre Dame fan, so I was trying to anchor you in there a little bit. So talk to me a little bit, man.
We won't have too much fighting. Yeah.
Too much, and it won't be a show about recruitment. So talk to me just a little bit, man. The first thing I want to tell my guests is, anyone that's really followed me before knows how much I just think there's a ton of bad content out there in our space, Clark. So, and this is one of the things that really gravitated me towards you at first. We're both kind of in the same space, helping other recruitment companies get a little bit better. But I'm really curious to how did you get into recruitment specifically? How did you get your start into this crazy field?
Yeah, it's people that I've talked to, you've talked to, and probably your own story. Someone called me at Aerotech, right, one of the bigger staffing firms out there, about a sales job. It wasn't a fit. In our conversation, he's like, "Hey, you should be a recruiter." I was like, "Great, that sounds great. What does that? What do you do?"
What does that mean?
I had no idea what any of that meant. So went through their interview process. Still wasn't quite sure, but you know what? At the time, I was coming from telecom sales, door to door, wearing my Verizon polo, commission only. They gave me a base salary of like $41K, and that's like all I needed to jump in. I was like, that's fine, and some commission, and I'll figure out how it all works later. So that's kind of how I got into recruiting. Recruited the light industrial skilled trades division in LA, and just my third day, I made like 3 placements, like go to works, right? We make the hiring decision for companies, and I was off and running.
Okay, that's fantastic. What year was that in, if you don't mind me asking? I'm just curious how many years you've been in it.
June 2013, so a little over 10 years now.
And I know 10 years is kind of recent for most of us, but I'm just curious from your perspective, Clark, how much have you seen the recruitment process and cycle change since 2013 till today?
I mean, it's so many ways. I mean, the obviously the COVID and the work from home has upended everything. Even LinkedIn. I mean, I mentioned skilled trades, general labor. I was not on LinkedIn 3 years ago. This month, I probably had maybe 200 LinkedIn connections. I have 13,000 now. So I didn't even touch LinkedIn. I think we had one division of the 8 that really was active on LinkedIn Recruiter at the time, and now I'm sure everyone. Right? It seems like everyone is. So there's just such a digital LinkedIn just boom in the last 10 years.
Well, and I think it's like the digital space for everyone too, because I've definitely seen this transition myself. So, and I got into recruitment, I guess I'd say kind of similarly, but for me, my background is I was a multi-unit operator for Sun Capital, and then most of the work I did was with Bar Louie. So I worked on the other side with teams of recruiters pretty much for my entire career. So I've done over 101 new store openings at a multi-unit level. And then through that process, I found a couple good recruiters that worked really well, but I was really not impressed with most of the work. I just didn't feel like it was connected as much to really our culture that we needed. And there was just some really low-hanging fruit there, I felt. But what I discovered really quick was I was pretty good at building teams myself. So, when I was going out and doing some process, I launched a supplement company back in about 2017. But I saw some of the same stuff that you likely did too. I mean, and again, so when I started with Bar Louie in 2010 and we're doing new store openings, I could just put an ad out on Indeed, or wherever the heck it was. I didn't really have a LinkedIn profile either. I had a really good following. And I'd say building teams was a little bit tough, but I think it was a little bit easier back then. I think the world's changed. And kind of where I've seen post-pandemic, and one of the things my company does quite a bit, and I'm really curious because of your company too, we really tried to attack for our clients, connecting their outbound for client acquisition or customer acquisition to employee acquisition, right? Because what we see is a lot of people have this great holistic approach about who they are until it goes into the candidate side, and it's just like, here's all this beautiful stuff of why you should buy from us, but they don't do the same thing from the back end. So I'm just, I was curious to talk to you about there. when did you get into your first agency role? Was that what made you kind of just start your own business from there? Like, how long were you in the private sector? And then I'm just curious about what that transition looked like for you.
Yeah, so I spent about 5 years at Aerotech. I left right in the beginning of 2018. I hit my all-time high that year and spread around like June or July, and it didn't do anything for me. I was just like, all right, I've learned all these systems. I've, trained recruiters, promoted some recruiters, had this growth, really figured out a tough market in selling skilled trade, generally all that in the LA market for Aerotech, which we were more of a premium staffing company. And I was like, I was getting world-class like NPS scores, for my clients and everything else. So the relationship was there. I was building recruiters, and it was just a grind, right? Being just a cog in the wheel of just a big, big company, a recruiting company. And I was just burnt out. So I was like, I kind of just figured out like, I could potentially, do entrepreneurship and consulting and at least kind of figure that out. So I just left. I gave a notice. It ended up being 3 weeks. I had a great relationship with my boss. She was a great woman, gave me so many opportunities. And so we ended on really good terms. And I was like, I just need to go out and kind of scratch this itch, like just kind of go figure out, what's going on out there.
I feel that.
Right. And
I feel that. Really, so you took a chance on yourself.
Yeah, I got to say, I didn't really have a plan. I had a buddy that needed some help with building a team and hiring, and so I just consulted him for a few months and kind of helped him with some business development strategy, with some hiring strategy, how to kind of manage some team members. He was in the event space, right, working with like Red Bull and different, events and concerts around. So kind of just started there with some friends and then kind of got out there on social media and was just helping small business owners with, again, hiring, sales, like all the stuff I was doing at Aerotech. But I wanted nothing to do with the agency world at that time. Yeah.
Clark, I want to hop in and ask you a question if it's okay. Like, how were your, and this might be a little bit of a weird one for you, but like, how were your emotions during that time? Because again, like the point of this show is to really just, I love that story, first of all. And I love that you just had the courage to step out there. But I think for a lot of folks that kind of encouragement, I mean, again, I jump out of planes. So like, I'm with you, brother. Yeah. Like, I'm like, where's the smoke? There's got to be some fire. Let me see. But I think what helps a lot of people is like, did you have any kind of anxiety making that? Or like, how did you have the confidence? I get it. You were tapped out where you were, burnout, the next decision. But like, can we break that down a little bit for like, how did you know to go towards this? And how did you have the confidence to not just kind of take that opportunity and go back to your next job?
So and it's a great question. So breaking it down, there's a few steps that happened. Number one, I had a runway. Right. So it's not like I went completely blind.
Smart.
Right. I had a runway. I think it's really important to have that and know what you can, because if you're selling with desperation and you have commission breath, whether you're with a company or on your own, it is brutal, and that is a recipe for disaster. So number one, I had a runway. Number two, I did about 1.5 years of research of just learning about entrepreneur, reading some books and realizing like at some point I just need to take a chance. And you mentioned the skydiving. That's the first time I went skydiving. I booked, I drove 2 hours to Cape Cod. I went, I jumped, I came home, and I was like, Mom, I just went skydiving. And she was like, what? I was like, so I do have that ability to kind of just dive right in. I did a little bit of a prep, but made sure I had a runway, a little bit of a prep, and I got to just go and rip the Band-Aid and figure it out. And that it just took me a few months, and then I made the decision by the end of the year I'm quitting. And I set that deadline, and that was, I had to. I couldn't break that promise to myself.
We're all recording this. I was going to say, I wish I could record all that, but that was all just gold. I mean, so the thing that I find in doing these Taking Chances episode 2 is everyone that's been successful comes from some kind of discipline, right? And I would say that everything you just said, even though we don't see ourselves as disciplined always, I don't think it's like a normal human trait, but I heard a lot of discipline in that statement. So like you took a chance on yourself, but it was a calculated chance. You build up whatever that KPI was. I've got my bills paid out 6 months, 12 months, whatever it looks like. You had a really long runway. You did your investigation, and you already knew that the emotion, anxiety, or whatever you want to call it, on the other end is like, hey, I'm burnout. I've taught everyone I can teach. I think I've learned everything I can learn. And now it's either I'm going to keep doing this forever or I'm going to go to the next thing. So that's awesome, man. So you had some clients to kind of start working with. First 6 months to 12 months, how was it for you? I mean, did it kind of just take off for you the same way as the internal for you?
It didn't at all. I thought I was better than I was at the time. I got humbled so quick within 15 months of being on my own. I don't know if I can curse, but I got my ass kicked. I won't do it often, but I got my butt kicked, and I've talked about it a little bit on LinkedIn, but not too much. I I got some momentum. I joined some mastermind programs. I learned about online marketing and copywriting and putting myself out there, and was doing some stuff on really building out on Facebook. And I got some success. I got some leads. I got some clients. And I was like, wow, I have this whole like audience. I can go attack the country. I can go internationally. I'm not limited to my little territory in LA. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to invest in myself. I met some entrepreneurs. I invested in some businesses. And within 15 months, I was broke. And I was in LA and I wanted to leave. I was like, I have learned all the lessons in about a 15 month, not all the lessons, but a lot of lessons. And I thought things were going to go in one way, and certain business partners and certain decisions, all my fault, right? All my own accountability. But I was like, oh shoot, like I'm like, what have I done, right? And I got humbled, right? I got humbled. It was just brutal. So it was a rocky first 2 years before it kind of started to get on the tracks.
Baptism by fire, but you probably learned a lot during that stage too. I mean, you said that too, but I'm sure you figured out a bunch of ways of not to do it, and then ultimately aligned on the way to do it.
I was going to say so many lessons. I think I learned what I didn't want to do. There was certain things with consulting. I wanted things more dialed in. And I was like, I didn't want to just be like a life coach or a mindset coach or a business coach. I was like, I haven't really built that yet in myself. And I realized like I had a lot of work to do myself and internally before I really got to the level where I felt comfortable offering coaching and consulting services, right? People always say that I was, good with providing the managing and then the recruiting, but I kind of got burnt out, so I got humbled. And I mean, it was really for me, I found faith. Like right before I kind of went downhill, I found God, I found my relationship with Jesus. And then 3 weeks later, he was like, oh yeah, now you're broke. And I was like, okay, so it really tested that initial faith. I was like, oh, this is the test that I hear about. And like that, leaning into that, that's when I realized like the humility, the lessons I learned, the mistakes I made, really taking that ownership. That's what started to allow the path. And I had a great friend out here in Columbus, so he's like, hey, come on out here, like move in with me, like we'll get you going, we'll get you some work, like we'll get you back on your feet. And he was literally a godsend. And so I came out at the end of 2019 and I started doing remodeling for $12 an hour. Then I was doing like a driving job for $15 an hour, and just to kind of like refresh my like spirit and my soul. And then he made an introduction to,
I gotcha.
A LinkedIn marketing agency. And that's kind of when I got back into sales, but it took a couple years for me to be burnt out, hit rock bottom, and then start to really pick myself back up and kind of start going down this path.
I love that though, Clark. It sounds like you discovered yourself in the process too. I mean, from the whole to the spirituality and everything, and different than mine. I mean, so first company I launched, I think I was fortunate. So HCR was the 7th company I've had. Couple were really good. I had like a handful that are too long of a stories, but like all those lessons that you learned, when I was a multi-unit operator, I first hopped into business. The first event-driven business I had was I owned an MMA league in the state of Pennsylvania, one of the first ones. Made a bunch of mistakes with that one, learned all those lessons. But strangely enough, when I was launching HCR about 3 years ago, I skydived the same way you did. One of my friends showed up to my apartment one day, and I was deathly afraid of heights. I was extremely hungover at the time. I do not drink that often, but we had a really late night. And he's like, hey, I got some tickets to go skydiving. And I'm like, when? He's like, now. And I'm like, there's no way I'm going. 5 minutes later, I was up in Longmont jumping out of a plane. What I didn't expect to happen was, my biggest fear was heights, and I've been a certified climber for a couple of years. But as soon as I exited that plane, and I landed, and I think this still might be like a sales pitch for skydiving in Longmont. Like, they filmed me right after, and it was so organic. I'm like, can I do this myself? And they're like, yeah. So I showed up the next day, got certified, was going through a rough time, was finding God myself during this time. So it's very curious that you and I found each other, and I find there's a lot of those similarities out there. But I was just recovering from a torn deltoid, and on my 75th jump, I blew my ACL out. I was 3 months into launching HCR. This is 2020, so we're about 6 months into the pandemic. So the only thing that was opened up was skydiving, and I was going through a massive ACL reconstruction. So I was bedridden for 6 months. But similar to you, I think if I had HCR earlier in my life without all those disciplines, I knew where I was trying to get with all this. And like, even though everything was very hard at the time, I had already started to build a good team. And the strange thing was during the pandemic, at the start of the pandemic, we were only in hospitality and a little bit of tech. Post pandemic, we're now in 5 industries. And really what happened there was from the world and God kind of slowing me down because I thought I learned so many of my lessons in business. What I learned is I was using physical fitness to not deal with things. I wasn't partying anymore, but I went from being a crazy guy running bars to now all I do is lift weights and run, and like if I had a problem, I'd run at it, but I just never stopped running. And I find it's very curious too, of like, I felt like myself, I had to get back to baseline and I got very humbled by a bunch, and that's when I really slowed down for the first time. My businesses were always good, but I just kind of came out of that endeavor moving a little bit slower, and what I mean is like, if I have an instinct, I'll sit with that for about 72 hours now. And maybe the direction I go is only 5 degrees different. But if you follow that over the course of a lifetime, those 2 ending points are so varying, So I appreciate you sharing that. And what I'm really curious to getting in now, because these are the posts I always see you share with your impressions. I'm assuming that marketing company led you to get back into LinkedIn, but how in the heck did you have, from what you're stating, that's really then growth from LinkedIn for only 2.5 to 3 years maximum. So you've went from basically 200 connections to, I believe I saw your impressions are over 1 million. I mean, a lot of your posts are getting more views than me, so I've got to learn some stuff from you, my friend. But talk to me about how that played out for you and how you got that encouragement.
I started working with the agency, I was managing about 15 accounts of the client accounts. So we were helping company coaches, salespeople with their LinkedIn profile, with their LinkedIn automation outreach, booking 10 to 20 calls a month, right? We probably all get those pitches. I think people are now up to, hey, I can book you 50 calls a month, right? So we were doing one of those like a few years ago, but I had never seen that before. And I had never really seen anything online. I was so used to offline selling and cold call, email, walking into companies and all that old school tactics. Exactly. And
grassroots
so this
kind of
blew
stuff.
my mind. I was like, automation? I can connect with people. Like, this frees up so much time to do the rest of the activity. I mean, it was just for a sales-minded person like myself. I mean, it was just it was magic. It looked like absolute magic, and I saw it working, and I got to see how it worked across different accounts, different industries. We handled a couple like influencer accounts as well, so I got to see how audiences would message influencers and the inbound lead and the outbound stuff, and just those 2 years there were. I mean, it was like an MBA for me. And what I realized is like seeing this, I was like, well, recruiters are on LinkedIn. There's a ton of recruiting agencies. I have this whole background. Why don't I just go help recruiting agencies? Because I can talk the language, and a lot of them don't even know this exists. So we started working with recruiting clients, and that's how I really started to get comfortable. And I was like, man, we could dive a lot deeper. Like, there's not a lot of sales training. You could add content here. There's not only the client side, but there's the candidate side, like you've mentioned before, right? Like, that's a lot different than just a SaaS, account executive, a SaaS company doing outreach, right? They're just selling a product. But with recruiting, there's so much relationship, there's so much nuance. I was like, well, I got to dive deeper than just doing lead generation. And so that's kind of what I started mapping out the digital recruiter. I'm like, I'm going to go off and do this on my own, because I was like, I have a vision for, I think, how this can be built out and how this can be done. So again, same thing, like left like on very good terms and created the runway. Like, I was building it part-time while I was working with the owner's full knowledge. Like, he was like totally understood I had to scratch this itch, and I kind of had to do it. And then I eventually went off on my own like last March, April 2022.
So that's right when I discovered you. I think it was in March or April when I was first seeing your post. So that's great timing. I understand what the digital recruiter is, and I want to get into that in the depth so the audience can really pull it out. But I just want to hop in too, because we were talking when we first met offline, and just to discover the synergy. So again, Feihu was a supplement company, and I wanted to start HCR probably about 5 years before I did, right? So when I was first getting out of multi-unit operations, I was talking to my former vice president. I'm like, hey, look, I think we could really do this and do really well at it. Probably a good thing I didn't. When I got into the e-commerce space and really excelled at that with Amazon sales, same thing, SaaS, outbound, just doing the same thing. And then I had been recruiting my whole life. So again, I wasn't a recruiter before there, but I was building brands internally. And I'm like, why are we not doing any of this for candidate acquisition? So again, when I first launched HCR, where a lot of companies, I don't really think we reinvented the wheel, but I mean, we got to 7 figures in the first 6 months because I was just advertising a little different. And I don't mean to the company, just even the jobs, So I'm like, okay, I learned how to be skinny with advertisements through social media. And I'm sure you're aware of this as well, being in our space. some of that's even changed post-pandemic with the change of Facebook. So some of the stuff we're doing and still learning some new tactics, but I find it really interesting. So you were coming from a same kind of endeavor and you had access to more and you're just like, man, this is low-hanging fruit and we're not doing any of this. So you got started in the digital recruiter. From your words, like what is the main purpose of digital recruiters for the recruitment companies out there? Because we've got a handful that work with us too, and I just love to give some information to them about you.
It's evolved quickly, and the way I break it down, we cover sales and recruiting processes. I would say LinkedIn, kind of putting your best foot forward, really starting with LinkedIn optimization, right? Get the most out of your digital tools. And then with content, right? Building the brand with content, getting the market awareness out there. So the mission and the way I've looked at recruiting is recruiters, especially the great ones, no problem making calls. They'll work all night, submittals, interviews, right? They kind of pride themselves on kind of finding those purple squirrels, kind of behind the scenes, sales, hitting the pavement, hitting the phones. But it's a recipe for burnout in this industry, and it happens a lot. So kind of what I have is I want to help people build an agency and a recruiting desk where they want to work. They don't feel like they have to work. Right. And so it's not necessarily it's not a lifestyle business, right? You can't just spend 2 hours a day on a recruiting agency and really expect much meaningful results. Like you have to get after it. But it's like, I want to just help you make more efficient, more fulfilling, more rewarding, and all those. And so you're able to match kind of better, match good people at good jobs, treat people the right way, but also get to work and have the right systems at the same time and really leverage your strength and create that market awareness. So it's really helping with the sales, the marketing, and some of the operations kind of all in one. So it's a big problem to tackle, but that's really what we focus on.
Well, and I think I didn't hear you say this. What I'm hearing you saying is you're really helping firms and independent recruiters stay closer to the money. Because for folks that haven't worked as a recruiter, the skills that earn you money are not 80% of what the time wasters are. Does that make sense, Clark, when I say it that way? Of like 80% of what the person's spending time on, if we can eliminate that for the recruiter, they can stay closer to the money, which means closer to the candidate relationship, closer to the client relationship, really building those nuanced relationships and seeing if they're both good fits for one another. Because I see the same thing. And, you said something that really sparked on a team meeting we had. And I feel like I'm a really good leader for my team, but this conversation came up a couple weeks ago. People love working for me. We just had to roll out mandating vacations. So, and again, my team's got 3 weeks of vacations they can take off anytime. But to your point about really hungry recruiters, all of my top performers, when I look back, I'm like, hey, you guys haven't taken a vacation yet. Oh, there's just no time. Well, you're going to start doing some silly things, though, when you don't think there's time, especially being remote. And to your point, how many folks, I'm curious about this one, how many folks have you been able to help pull anyone back out of burnout? I'm sure you've seen some probably instant lifts from some of the clients you've worked with, but have you been any kind of profit with there? I mean, any kind of success with really just maybe even helping the individual as a person, not even just as a recruiter?
Fine. I mean, you said it. You said better than I could, and I've had those conversations with clients and with prospects and recruiters, right? I want to get you closer to the money. What that does, I mean, what I've seen people just run some automations, it frees up hours of their day. I've had people be like, I've saved up to 80% of my time on sourcing outreach just by working with you. Now I could spend more time with my family, or I can spend more time kind of, whatever else, or I'm, 10xing the productivity of my team members, and everyone's like wondering how I'm getting it done, or I've like productized my job so I can spend 3 to 4 hours a day, and then I'm building my side business on the side. So I've heard all different stories. I've had some owners be like, I don't have to work on Tuesday. I can take my daughter to the doctors because I know this is running for me in the background, or I know my content is going to generate, like it's putting myself out there. So I feel like I've done my business development for the day or my recruiting for the day, and that's what I love to hear, right? It's that light bulb going off and the systems coming together, and people will be like, wow, this is way more fun. I can really build. I can scale this to what I want the business to be. And there's a plan, there's a vision, and there's light at the end of the tunnel.
I love that too. And I mean, I think it's something that I see with my own team at times too. And it's like the burnout's real, and not from anyone not trying the hardest, but we sometimes will get into some conversations where, and I don't think anyone intends to do this, but you can feel really busy in recruitment and accomplish nothing. And I mean, I'm sure you've coached some people on there. And what I mean by that, for the folks that have never been as a recruiter, so I was a multi-unit operator, and I controlled 125 million of revenue with 2,500 employees. And this story might make sense. And I thought I was organized and disciplined until I owned a recruitment company with just 3 recruiters and 15 clients. And the level of communication that was coming at me for that first 6 months, Clark, was like, holy shit, there's got to be a better way. And the same thing, so curious to talk to you more offline and probably have you back on for another one. We've been building a ton of automation ourselves. A lot of ours is with Zaps right now. And this is probably a conversation for another time because it's not on our list, but like, I'm curious about what processes you're automating. Cause again, I think automating the right processes helps to keep people closer. I've seen some of the tools that are out there, I think are automating some process that are probably going to make it easier for you and I to land clients, you know? So I just think for the folks hearing this, and I'm not taking anything away from Clark, automation is key in these days, but make sure you're never automating the humane parts or the hospitality parts. I mean, so where you're really being client focused and in front of people. Have you guys consulted, or have you consulted on anyone and fixed any AI or any kind of automation?
Yeah,
to be
the
better?
AI and the automation. It's just, as you said, it's just a tool. It's how you leverage it. So kind of what we teach in the process is if the automation should amplify a strong value prop, right? Knowing your ICP, doing the work on the front end, right? Building out those targeting lists that are accurate and that are refined. And if you have, like the way I would say, if you have the right LinkedIn profile that like leverages your strength and shows the problem you solve to your market, that's step number one, right? And then go with the right list and then implement that into the automation. And then your messaging, start conversations. Don't pitch, don't spray and pray. Like take the time on the front end, generate the conversations, right? Do the work, understand your market of like, what are some of the questions that you should be asking them to start a hiring discussion, right? And then with the content is going to amplify that, right? So the drip sequence can be a few touch points, but every piece of content is also a touch point, right? So where most people give up after 3 to 5, right? But buyers take at least 8 to really see you, have the drip sequence, have the content. So it's part of a holistic strategy. It's not automation in a vacuum. And I think that's the key, right? When I hear people, well, I outsourced it, it didn't work and all that. Well, what was the rest of the plan? Why is your profile not optimized, right? What was your messaging? Why was it 5 paragraphs and all about you and not about the prospect, right? And why is there no content that gets me to build trust and to know you better, right? Recruiting is a low barrier to entry industry, but it's a high bar to stand out and it's a high bar to success, right? You got to chase that bar, but right now you're swimming like you're a dime a dozen, right? You got to be able to stand out, right? I don't care if you have an industry or if you help ready to scale companies or you do a bunch of industries, right? You still got to stand out. And like, again, that goes back to dialing in the basics, knowing your market and speaking their language.
I mean, I got to tell you guys, I talk to CEOs that control $150 million companies. We represent right now $22 billion of global revenue. Clark, I mean this. I'm just smiling the whole time you're talking, man. I wish we found each other probably 6 years ago because I want to work with something on you because like I just resonate with everything you're saying. It's the same thing that we try to see too. Is really just going holistically. You know, what the thing I love about recruitment, and I think the thing that's changed a little bit, pandemic even to post-pandemic, and I think it's something that you were probably doing organically and we were too. We don't cold pitch to too many people. Most people, now we pitch, but most people that we're interacting with, we've already interacted with before we're pitching. But I think that's one of the things that my team was doing pretty organically before we started turning on some automation is like, hey, we just don't want to go out and throw in 5,000 contacts and just say who we are and what we do. But for us, we're really looking for a very specialized kind of client. And I mean, we stand by our motto. We want to find the best talent for the best opportunities. So that kind of, you know, we've had to make some hard decisions with clients. For the last 3 years, we have fired a client that we've done at least 6 figures with because they haven't honored their end of the contract. And I mean by taking care of candidates. And I got to be honest with you, Clark, that's never been a hard decision for me. And every time that we've done that, we have scaled by 20 to 30% within the quarter after. Because I think one of the things I get frustrated about, and you and I haven't talked too much about frustrations, but I know we both are in the recruitment space and we both also help recruitment companies. I just see a lot of, on LinkedIn specifically, so much victim mentality and content. And when I first resonated with what you're saying, and I love hearing you in conversation because now I know it's not just a post, it's who you are. You know, like you can just like scream that out. I mean, and I feel it. But I was just so gravitated towards Clark's content at first because it's just that different. And in the same way with what we do, we say this to every discovery call we're on. We're going to fix the recruitment cycle in the United States. And people say it's a bold statement, always. And I always say this, yes. Not really, because it's that fucking bad. And so I think just like to the point of what, and I loved how you said it, it's a low barrier to entry, but very few people excel at this. And I can tell you guys that Clark is definitely someone that if I had a team, and even myself, Clark, I'm thinking about after this one, we're probably going to connect and see if we can't share some trade secrets. But before we get up too much time, I didn't know this was this new for you, but from March, and you already got your podcast, The Digital Recruiter, going. So this just launched in August. Tell me a little bit about that and how can I guess, absolutely. Who is the right kind of person that wants to watch that show and how can we
full-time.
find that show?
2 years. Yeah. No, just clarify
Year and
for
a half,
the.
my bad,
No.
sorry.
It's
Yep.
all good. It's all good. Just so people are like, wait,
We'll
5
edit that
months.
out.
Who have you helped, right? But we've worked with hundreds of recruiters since in the last 3 years. The Digital Recruiter podcast. It stemmed from really kind of the thought process you have, right? You're talking to a bunch of great people that are thinking differently. I've heard other episodes that you had with like a Jeremy and an Alex, and you're talking about like the new type of leader, right? There's like a new generation type of leader that's really needed to manage this age, right? The offline, the online, the digital stuff. And I'm working with these owners, solo owners, small agencies, and they have such a powerful voice. I'm like, I want to get their story out there, and I want to make their journey, accessible to someone else and be like, hey, I can do this too. Like, this is the way I want to do it. And I can run a good agency, and I can do it the right way, and I can have systems and build my authentic voice out there. And the right clients that I want are going to accept me. Right? And I was like, I got to get these stories out there. And our mutual connection, Travis, like, he was one of those. Like, he has had such an impact on me and our team and the people in our community, just from just sharing his wealth of knowledge and just getting that out there to more people, and the more people that are really aligned with this type of vision of where we want to work hard. And I think it was Jeremy that said the harmony, right? Not work-life balance, but having that harmony, but work hard and the right systems and make the right evolutions and just kind of on that path. And there's a subset of us, I think, in this world that are really pushing for that. And LinkedIn and podcasts and all that, such an amazing way to connect and bring that together and just have some inspiration, right? I don't ever try to go viral, and I'm very adamant about that. I just kind of want to say kind of what I'm experiencing, what I'm seeing, sharing it, and if kind of build my tribe, 100 people, 500 people, 1,000 people. That's plenty, right? And in that, we can solve a lot of cool problems and have a good time doing it, and make some money.
I love that too, Clark, everything you're saying too. And that's one of the biggest things I love about, I think what I'm trying to bring to the recruitment space too is, I think NPA taught me this a little bit too, is like, I've definitely got my collaboration hat on way more. And, when I talk to my clients, it's like, we're in process right now with some massive international clients that if I didn't have NPA, there was no way I'd pull this off myself with all the automation, so it's good to have some like-minded partners, but to the point where you're saying that's actually where I met Travis through. So Travis and I met through that group, and then him and I just have done some off placements ourselves. But again, both being from Denver resonated. What I'm trying to do and what you're trying to do, and I think what maybe we should put both of our forward visions on, is really just grabbing like-minded folks like this. Because I think right now, what I can tell you, what upsets me is anytime we get into economic strifes, the first thing that happens is we either lay off internal teams or bring them back on, right? Depending on where it's at. We either overhire or underhire. And then typically, when I've been on the operations side of massive boardrooms, usually the recruitment expense kind of goes into G&A, and no one's really looking at this as a holistic approach of like, hey, training and retention should be locked together. And what we really try to do for our clients is, if you've got a great HR team, I want your HR team to focus on retention. Let us help you learn how to get the acquisition process and go holistic. But we just kind of see this combative nature of, like, again, the larger the client, times get tough. Like, back at the beginning of this year, all of our recruiter friends get laid off, and then those companies, you follow that trade 14 months down the road, they're behind in hiring. And it's just this like cycle I've seen from corporate America for so long. So it's like, how do we stop this and really educate the companies on how to build brands better? So Clark, I love all this information, man. I'd love to have you back on. If you've ever got a slot for the Digital Recruiter, I would love to speak to your audience as well, if that's a possibility.
I'm sending you the link right after this, so don't worry. Yeah.
Beautiful, man. So I don't think I asked you this before. We'll link all this, but what is the website? And obviously we can just find you from at Clark Willcox on LinkedIn, but what's the website? How can some people get in contact with you?
Absolutely. It's digitalrecruiter.io. And it's Clark Willcox with 2 L's in Willcox. Find me on LinkedIn, shoot me a message. I got links to the website, the podcast, all that stuff on there. But if you got any questions or just want to say hi, feel free to reach out. Be happy to connect.
Well, Clark, I really appreciate you being here on such short notice for today, and I'm excited to have our next conversation. And I think if you folks follow us long enough, I'm just going to make a bold statement, so this will be on a podcast. I think Clark and I will be working on something eventually together, so stay tuned for that. But Clark, thanks so much for coming in, man, and I just enjoyed all the insights, man. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I can't wait to keep following that content.
Dude, I appreciate it, Shaun, and I would agree with you on kind of future endeavors, and I just appreciate it so much, so thank you for having me.
It's good to see you, my man. We'll talk soon. Taking chances. We'll see you next time, guys.